The rain hammered against the windows of the military briefing room as Colonel Martinez shuffled through classified files. Outside, the storm mirrored the chaos brewing in the intelligence community. 3 high-value targets had vanished without a trace, each one a crucial asset in the ongoing fight against international terrorism. The Pentagon was breathing down his neck, demanding answers he didn't have. Sarah sat in the corner of the room, her presence almost ghost-like despite her striking appearance. At 28, she possessed an unusual combination of delicate Asian features and piercing green eyes that seemed to see through everything and everyone. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore standard military fatigues that somehow looked different on her lean frame. Most people in the room didn't even notice her, which was exactly how she preferred it. She had been recruited into the Special Operations Unit 3 years earlier, though her background remained largely classified even to her colleagues. What they did know was that she spoke 7 languages fluently, held advanced degrees in psychology and international relations, and had completed training programs that broke most candidates within the first week. Her psychological profile was marked with red flags that would have disqualified anyone else, but her results spoke for themselves. The mission briefing began at precisely 1400 hours. General Harrison, a man whose reputation preceded him into every room, stood at the front displaying satellite images on the large screen. The targets were scattered across 3 different countries, each one protected by layers of security that had proven impenetrable to conventional approaches. Sarah listened without taking notes, her mind automatically cataloging every detail. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to remember conversations, faces, and seemingly insignificant details that often proved crucial later. Her colleagues sometimes joked that she had a computer for a brain, but they had no idea how close to the truth that observation was. As the general outlined the mission parameters, Sarah's attention drifted to the psychological profiles of their targets. She could see patterns that others missed, connections that existed in the spaces between official reports and intelligence assessments. These weren't random disappearances or simple defections. Someone was playing a much larger game, and the missing assets were just pieces on a board that most people couldn't even see. The room fell silent when General Harrison asked for volunteers. This wasn't the kind of mission that came with guarantees or backup plans. Success would mean preventing a terrorist attack that could kill thousands of innocent people. Failure would likely mean death, or worse, capture and interrogation by enemies who didn't believe in the Geneva Convention. Sarah stood up slowly, her movement fluid and deliberate. Every eye in the room turned to her, though she seemed completely unaffected by the attention. She had learned long ago that being underestimated was often her greatest advantage. People saw a young woman and made assumptions that proved fatal to their plans and sometimes to themselves. Colonel Martinez leaned forward in his chair. He had worked with Sarah on 2 previous operations, both of which had concluded successfully despite impossible odds. There was something about her approach to dangerous situations that conventional military doctrine. She didn't just complete missions. She seemed to anticipate problems that hadn't even occurred to the planning committee. The general's voice cut through the tension in the room. "State your call sign for the record, soldier." It was standard protocol, though everyone knew that special operations personnel often used code names that revealed nothing about their true identities. In Sarah's case, even her real name was buried under layers of classification that required presidential authorization to access. Sarah looked directly at General Harrison, her green eyes reflecting a depth that made him slightly uncomfortable. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, yet every person in the room heard her clearly. The 2 words she said would haunt the memories of everyone present for years to come, though none of them understood their true significance at the time. "Dark Angel." The silence that followed stretched for several seconds. Colonel Martinez felt a chill run down his spine, though he couldn't explain why. There was something in the way she had spoken those words, as if they carried weight beyond their simple meaning. General Harrison made a note in his file and nodded for her to sit down, but Sarah remained standing. "I'll need complete operational autonomy," she said, her voice still quiet but carrying an authority that seemed to fill the entire room. "No backup, no communication schedule, no extraction timeline. This mission requires a different approach than anything in your standard playbook." The general frowned. Every military doctrine emphasized the importance of backup plans and regular communication. Sending a single operative into hostile territory without support was essentially a suicide mission, regardless of their training or experience. "That's not how we operate, soldier. Protocol exists for a reason." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "Protocol is why the last 3 missions failed. Protocol is why those assets are dead or compromised. Protocol is why we're sitting in this room instead of preventing the next attack." Colonel Martinez had seen Sarah in action before, but he had never heard her speak so directly to a superior officer. She was typically quiet during briefings, absorbing information and asking precise questions that revealed gaps in their intelligence. This level of assertiveness was something new, and it made him wonder what she knew that the rest of them didn't. General Harrison studied Sarah for a long moment, weighing his options. The political pressure from Washington was enormous, and conventional approaches had yielded nothing but failure and body counts. Sometimes desperate situations required desperate measures, even if those measures violated everything he had learned in 30 years of military service. "You have 48 hours to produce results," he said finally. "After that, we implement standard extraction protocols whether you agree or not, and if this mission fails, the responsibility falls entirely on your shoulders." Sarah nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acceptance and dismissal. She turned and walked toward the door, her footsteps silent despite the hard flooring. As she reached for the handle, Colonel Martinez called out to her. "Sarah, what aren't you telling us?" She paused without turning around. For a moment, it seemed like she might actually answer the question that had been hanging over her career like a shadow. Instead, she opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving behind only the echo of her whispered call sign and a room full of people who suddenly realized they knew almost nothing about the woman they had just sent on a mission that could determine the fate of thousands. The rain continued to fall against the windows, washing away the traces of a day that would later be marked in classified files as the beginning of something that no one in that room could have anticipated. By morning, Sarah would be gone, along with her equipment, her files, and every trace of her presence in the Special Operations database. The only evidence that she had ever existed would be the memory of her voice saying those 2 words that would become legend in certain circles of the intelligence community. But that was still hours away, and for now, the people in the briefing room simply assumed they had just witnessed another routine mission assignment. They had no idea they had just said goodbye to someone who was about to disappear from the official world entirely, taking with her secrets that could reshape everything they thought they knew about loyalty, sacrifice, and the thin line between heroism and something far more complex and dangerous. The abandoned warehouse in Prague had been empty for 3 years, its broken windows and rusted metal siding marking it as another casualty of economic downturn. Local authorities occasionally patrolled the area, but they never ventured inside the maze of concrete corridors and shadowy rooms that had once housed a thriving textile operation. It was the perfect place for someone who needed to disappear from the world while remaining close enough to watch it burn. Sarah moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had mapped every inch of the building during her first night there. She had chosen this location carefully, studying satellite images and city records until she found a place that existed in the gaps between official attention and criminal interest. The warehouse provided multiple escape routes, clear sight lines to 3 major transportation hubs, and most importantly, a history of being ignored by everyone who mattered. Her equipment lay spread across a makeshift table constructed from shipping pallets and corrugated metal. Military-grade communication devices sat next to civilian electronics that had been modified in ways that would void their warranties and violate several international treaties. She had spent the past 18 hours monitoring encrypted frequencies, intercepting cell phone conversations, and tracking financial transactions that painted a picture far more complex than anything discussed in the Pentagon briefing room. The 3 missing assets weren't victims of random kidnapping or terrorist recruitment. They had been selected specifically because of their knowledge about something called Project Nightfall, a classified operation that didn't appear in any official military database. Sarah had discovered references to it buried in communication fragments and financial records that required advanced cryptographic analysis to decode. Whatever Project Nightfall involved, it was worth killing for, and someone with significant resources was willing to do exactly that. Her laptop screen displayed a web of connections that linked the missing assets to defense contractors, private military companies, and shell corporations registered in countries that didn't ask questions about their clients' activities. The pattern suggested coordination at a level that required inside knowledge of military operations and access to classified intelligence. Someone within the American defense establishment was playing both sides of the game, and they were very good at covering their tracks. Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from a contact whose identity was known only to a handful of people in the intelligence community. The text contained coordinates for a meeting location and a time exactly 12 hours in the future. There was no signature, no additional information, and no way to trace the message back to its source. In her line of work, such communications were either lifelines or death traps, and the only way to tell the difference was to take the risk. She had been expecting this contact ever since she discovered the first references to Project Nightfall. 3 years earlier, during her second classified operation, she had encountered evidence of a rogue network operating within the American military structure. Her official report had been classified and buried, but she had kept copies of everything, knowing that someday the information would prove crucial. That day had apparently arrived. The meeting location was a 24-hour coffee shop in the Old Town district, the kind of place where international students and night shift workers gathered to escape the loneliness of their respective situations. Sarah arrived 40 minutes early, taking a table near the back exit with a clear view of both the front entrance and the narrow alley that served as the building's secondary access point. She ordered black coffee and a pastry she didn't intend to eat, then settled in to observe the other customers. At precisely midnight, a woman in her 50s entered the coffee shop and ordered tea with the kind of precision that suggested military training. She had silver-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and wore civilian clothes that somehow managed to look like a uniform. When she sat down across from Sarah, her movements were economical and purposeful, revealing nothing about her emotional state or intentions. "You're younger than I expected," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight accent that could have been German or Dutch or something else entirely. "When I first heard about the Dark Angel, I assumed it was a code name for someone with more experience." Sarah sipped her coffee and waited. In her experience, people who initiated mysterious midnight meetings usually had something important to say, and patience was often the most effective way to extract the maximum amount of information from such encounters. The woman across from her seemed comfortable with silence, which suggested either extensive training or natural psychological resilience. "My name is," the woman continued, "and until 6 months ago, I was Deputy Director of Strategic Operations for the Defense Intelligence Agency. I'm currently listed as killed in action during a training exercise that never actually took place." This revelation should have surprised Sarah, but she had learned to expect the impossible when dealing with black operations and shadow networks. People died and came back to life in her world. Identities shifted like weather patterns, and official records were often elaborate fiction designed to hide uncomfortable truths. Might be exactly who she claimed to be, or she might be an elaborate deception designed to test Sarah's loyalty or eliminate a potential threat. "Project Nightfall," Sarah said quietly, watching his reaction carefully. The older woman's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her teacup. It was the kind of micro-expression that revealed trained control over emotional responses, which could indicate either extensive preparation or genuine surprise. Nodded slowly. "You've done your homework. Most people with your security clearance wouldn't have found even a reference to that designation. The fact that you connected it to the missing assets suggests either remarkable analytical abilities or access to intelligence sources that should be impossible for someone at your level." "Both," Sarah replied, allowing herself a small smile. "The question is whether you're here to recruit me or kill me. In my experience, people don't fake their own deaths unless they're running from something or toward something equally dangerous." The coffee shop around them continued its quiet nighttime rhythm. A university student typed furiously on a laptop near the window, while an elderly man read a newspaper in a language Sarah didn't recognize. The normality of the scene provided in strange contrast to the conversation taking place at their table, where two women discussed classified operations and faked deaths as casually as they might have talked about the weather. Reached into her jacket slowly, telegraphing her movements to avoid triggering any defensive reactions. She a manila envelope sealed with wax and placed it on the table between them. The envelope bore no markings or identifying information, but Sarah could tell from its weight and thickness that it contained photographs and documents rather than simple written correspondence. Project Nightfall was designed to identify and eliminate security threats within the military intelligence community, explained, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the coffee shop. The operation was authorized at the highest levels and given unlimited resources to root out suspected foreign agents and domestic traitors. Sarah felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. Operations like Project Nightfall were typically created with the best of intentions, but they had a tendency to evolve beyond their original parameters. History was full of examples where internal security programs had become instruments of political control or personal vendetta, destroying innocent people in pursuit of threats that existed mainly in the paranoid imaginations of their creators. The 3 missing assets weren't kidnapped, continued. They were assassinated by Project Nightfall operatives because they had discovered evidence that the program had been compromised by the very people it was supposed to identify. Someone within the defense establishment is using Nightfall resources to eliminate anyone who might expose their activities. The envelope remained unopened between them, but Sarah could guess what it contained. Photographs of crime scenes that had been staged to look like accidents or suicides. Financial records showing payments to shell companies that existed only long enough to complete specific transactions. Personnel files of people who had asked inconvenient questions and subsequently died in training accidents or overseas operations. "Why come to me?" Sarah asked. "If you have evidence of corruption within Project Nightfall, there are official channels for reporting such activities. Congressional oversight committees, inspector generals, even direct appeals to the Secretary of Defense." His expression grew grim. "Because the corruption goes all the way to the top. The people who should be investigating these activities are the same people who authorized them in the first place. Project Nightfall has become a tool for eliminating political inconveniences and protecting powerful interests. Anyone who tries to expose the truth through official channels ends up dead or discredited." The weight of this revelation settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She had suspected that her superiors were hiding something about the missing assets, but she hadn't imagined the scope of the conspiracy was describing. If Project Nightfall had truly been compromised, then her own mission might be part of an elaborate setup designed to eliminate her as a potential threat. Slid the envelope across the table. "Everything you need to know is in there. Proof that Project Nightfall has been weaponized against American citizens, evidence of assassinations disguised as accidents, and most importantly, the identity of the person who's been pulling the strings from the beginning." Sarah picked up the envelope but didn't open it immediately. Once she looked at the contents, there would be no going back to her previous life. She would either have to act on whatever information had provided, or she would have to live with the knowledge that she had chosen to ignore evidence of systemic corruption and murder. Neither option seemed particularly appealing, but the choice had been made the moment she accepted the Dark Angel designation. "There's something else you should know," said, standing up to leave. "The person behind Project Nightfall knows about your investigation. They know you've connected the missing assets to classified operations, and they know you've been monitoring encrypted communications without authorization. You probably have less than 24 hours before they decide you become too dangerous to leave alive." With that cheerful observation, walked out of the coffee shop and disappeared into the Prague night, leaving Sarah alone with an envelope that contained either salvation or damnation. The coffee had grown cold while they talked, and the pastry remained untouched on its small plate. Sarah sat in the quiet, surrounded by people who had no idea that their normal evening had just been interrupted by a conversation that could reshape the entire intelligence community. She opened the envelope slowly, knowing that whatever she found inside would determine the course of everything that followed. The photographs spilled across the coffee shop table like pieces of a puzzle that revealed a picture too terrible to contemplate fully. Sarah's trained eye each image automatically, noting details that would have been invisible to civilian observers. Suicide scenes that showed signs of struggle. Training accidents where the safety protocols had been deliberately sabotaged. Overseas operations where American personnel had been killed by weapons that officially didn't exist. At the bottom of the envelope, a single document bore the letterhead of the Defense Intelligence Agency and a classification level that required special authorization even to acknowledge its existence. The signature at the bottom belonged to General Harrison, the same man who had authorized her current mission less than 48 hours earlier. The document outlined Project Nightfall's expanded operational parameters, including authorization to eliminate threats within the American military structure itself. Sarah's hands remained steady as she processed this information, but her mind raced through the implications. Her own mission wasn't a rescue operation at all. It was a setup designed to place her in a position where she could be eliminated without raising questions about her death. The three missing assets had likely discovered the same truth she was now holding in her hands, and they had paid for that knowledge with their lives. A new message appeared on her encrypted phone, this one containing detailed schematics of the building where she was currently sitting. Red dots marked the positions of armed personnel who had surrounded the coffee shop while she was reading evidence. Escape routes were highlighted in yellow, but each one terminated at points where additional teams waited in ambush positions. Someone had anticipated her meeting with and planned accordingly. The message included a timestamp showing that the surveillance teams had been in position for over an hour. They had watched her enter the coffee shop, observed her conversation with, and allowed the exchange of information to proceed before closing their trap. This level of coordination required resources and intelligence capabilities that only a major government organization could deploy, confirming claims about the scope of the conspiracy she had uncovered. Sarah gathered the photographs and documents quickly, stuffing them back into the manila envelope before standing up from her table. The university student near the window looked up from his laptop as she passed, and she caught a glimpse of military-grade communication equipment hidden beneath his academic facade. The elderly man with the foreign newspaper folded his reading material and reached for something concealed beneath his jacket. Even the barista behind the counter moved with the careful precision of someone with tactical training. The back exit led to an alley that should have provided access to the main street, but Sarah could see vehicle headlights positioned at both ends of the narrow passage. She had walked into a textbook containment operation, the kind of trap that required weeks of planning and significant financial resources to execute properly. The fact that her enemies had invested this much effort in her elimination suggested that information was even more damaging than she had initially realized. Instead of attempting to flee through the obvious escape routes, Sarah made her way to the coffee shop's basement storage area. Most urban buildings constructed before the Second World War included utility tunnels and maintenance passages that connected to neighboring structures or municipal infrastructure. During her initial reconnaissance of Prague, she had studied architectural plans and city engineering documents that revealed a network of tunnels beneath the old town district. The basement door was locked, but Sarah's training included techniques for bypassing standard security measures without leaving evidence of forced entry. She descended stone steps that dated back several centuries, entering a space that smelled of dampness and disuse. Her small flashlight revealed shelves lined with coffee supplies and cleaning equipment, but more importantly, it illuminated a maintenance hatch in the far corner that provided access to the tunnel system she had identified in her research. The tunnels beneath Prague had served various purposes throughout the city's history, from smuggling routes during wartime to drainage systems during periods of municipal expansion. Sarah navigated the underground passages using a mental map she had memorized during her preparation phase, moving through darkness toward an exit point several blocks away from the coffee shop. The sound of her footsteps echoed off stone walls that had witnessed centuries of secrets and desperate escapes. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer as her pursuers realized she had evaded their carefully planned containment operation. Radio chatter echoed through the tunnels, indicating that search teams were being deployed throughout the neighborhood with orders to locate and apprehend one female subject considered extremely dangerous. The description they broadcast matched Sarah's physical appearance with an accuracy that confirmed the surveillance operation had been monitoring her for some time. She emerged from the tunnel system through a maintenance entrance in the basement of an apartment building 8 blocks from the coffee shop. The building's residents were asleep, unaware that their home had just served as an escape route for someone fleeing a government assassination team. Sarah made her way to the roof using emergency stairs, then crossed to an adjacent building using a route she had planned during her initial survey of the area. From her elevated position, she could observe the tactical teams that had surrounded the coffee shop. Military vehicles blocked every street within a 6-block radius, and personnel in civilian clothing maintained overwatch positions on rooftops throughout the area. The operation involved at least 50 people and resources that could only be authorized at the highest levels of government. General Harrison's signature on documents suddenly took on a much more sinister significance. Sarah activated her satellite communication device and transmitted a brief coded message to an address that didn't appear in any official directory. The message contained coordinates for a secure location where she would attempt to establish contact with remaining elements of the legitimate intelligence community. If claims were accurate, identifying trustworthy personnel within the current government structure would be nearly impossible. But Sarah knew of unofficial networks that operated independently of normal chains of command. The response came within minutes, providing instructions for a dead drop location where additional information would be waiting. The message included authentication codes that confirmed the sender's identity as someone Sarah had worked with during her first classified assignment, before Project Nightfall had begun its transformation from counterintelligence operation to assassination program. At least one person within the intelligence community remained loyal to the original mission of protecting American interests, rather than serving corrupt political agendas. Sarah spent the next hour moving through Prague's labyrinthine streets, using techniques designed to defeat both human surveillance and electronic tracking systems. She changed direction randomly, doubled back through crowded areas, and utilized public transportation in patterns that would confuse automated analysis systems. By the time she reached the designated dead drop location, she was confident that she had evaded her immediate pursuers, though she knew the search would continue with increasing intensity. The dead drop was located in a public park where early morning joggers had begun their daily exercise routines. Sarah retrieved a package hidden beneath a park bench, finding inside it a new identity, emergency funds, and most importantly, contact information for a network of former intelligence operatives who had gone underground when they discovered the extent of Project Nightfall's corruption. The package also contained evidence that several other operatives had uncovered similar information about government-sponsored assassinations, creating the foundation for a resistance movement within the intelligence community itself. A handwritten note at the bottom of the package bore a message that chilled Sarah's blood despite its simple language. "They know about the Dark Angel designation. Was found dead 3 hours ago. Trust no one in official channels. The war has begun." Sarah stood in the quiet park, watching joggers pursue their morning routines while processing the magnitude of what she had discovered. Death confirmed that Project Nightfall was willing to eliminate anyone who threatened their operations, regardless of their previous service record or security clearance. The reference to war suggested that the conflict between legitimate intelligence operatives and the corrupted elements of Project Nightfall had moved beyond isolated incidents to open hostilities. She burned evidence package using a small chemical incendiary that reduced the documents to unrecognizable ash within seconds. The information contained in those files was now stored in her memory, where it would remain until she could find a way to expose the conspiracy without getting herself or other innocent people killed. The original 3 missing assets had died because they had tried to work within official channels to report their discoveries. Sarah would not make the same mistake. As the sun rose over Prague, casting long shadows across the park where she stood, Sarah made a decision that would reshape her entire existence. She could not return to her previous life within the military structure, as doing so would mean certain death at the hands of the very people she had sworn to serve. Instead, she would have to disappear completely from the official world, taking with her the Dark Angel designation, and using her skills to wage a different kind of war against enemies who hid behind government authority and classified operations. The hunt for her would continue, but Sarah had advantages that her pursuers didn't fully understand. She had been trained to operate independently in hostile environments. She had access to resources and contacts that existed outside normal intelligence channels, and most importantly, she had nothing left to lose. The woman who had whispered "Dark Angel" in that Pentagon briefing room was gone forever, replaced by someone who would haunt the shadows until justice prevailed or everything burned to the ground in the attempt. 3 blocks away, encrypted communications reported that the primary target had successfully evaded containment and should be considered extremely dangerous to operational security. Search teams were being redeployed with authorization to use lethal force if necessary to prevent further compromise of classified information. The official hunt for the Dark Angel had begun, but none of the hunters understood that their quarry had just declared war on the entire corrupt system they represented. In the distance, church bells marked the beginning of another day in Prague, a city that had witnessed countless revolutions and conspiracies throughout its long history. Sarah walked away from the park and disappeared into the crowd of mourning commuters, carrying with her secrets that could topple governments and the determination to use them wisely. The dark angel had vanished from the official world, but something far more dangerous had taken her place.